feels weird hearing my own voice like this. Takes a while to get used to it. But I'm Karolina Norèe, and I'm super excited to be here in Kuwait. It's my very first time in this country, and so far I think it's beautiful. Everyone seems very... I've been lucky with the weather, as it seems, and been able to go for walks and walk around the beach there, and it's just stunning. So thank you very much for having me here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about wildlife photography, so I hope you guys are excited for that. Let's just jump into it. To get to know each other a little bit, here's a little bit about me. I'm, as I said, Karolina Norèe is my full name, and I'm 27 years old. I'm originally from Sweden, but I moved to South Africa about 7 years ago after I met my fiance there, and I've been living in the country ever since. And then eventually started going into wildlife photography. I did my FOGASA level 1, which is a guiding qualification. So I am a qualified safari guide, and that's how I started getting into the wildlife field. And then for a very long time, for 4 years, so not that long, but 4 years, I worked in the lodge industry, so the hotel industry in the national park in South Africa. And I was a front of house, which is the FOH, and the lodge manager. And front of house is guest relations, receptionist basically at a hotel, but at a lodge. So I was able to live and work in the wild by doing that. And that's when I started doing photography on the side, doing wildlife photography. Since I was able to live and work there, it was really convenient for me to be able to go out and photograph the wildlife. And then lockdown happened, COVID came, and we couldn't get any guests, and we all shut down. And that's when I decided to start studying photography a lot more and try to pursue it as a career. So then I did a professional diploma in photography. Then from there I started building my photography business and my social media and so on. And eventually I was able to go full-time with my photography business, which is called Karolina Norèe Wild Photography. And then I also started at the same time with my fiance, we started a travel agency or a safari company called Wildest Kruger Safaris. So that's what we did. We resigned from our full-time jobs and then started these businesses from the start and doing it full-time. And that's what we do to this day. That's a little bit about me. I'm thinking we'll start with explaining a little bit about where I operate and where I do my photography, because I think it's good to just get a bit of an idea of where I do most of my work. So obviously we've got Africa. I'm sure you guys have seen this before. And I'm based all the way down here in South Africa. But I also do a little bit of work in Tanzania. I usually go about once a year hosting guests on safari. And I'm also doing quite a lot of work in Botswana, every now and then in Namibia as well. So, but mostly South Africa and Southern Africa. And in South Africa, it's a very big country. This is all the provinces in South Africa. And I'm explaining this because I know some of you who were at the workshop with Fatima yesterday. She is based, let me see, down here, which is quite far from where I live. So that's why we actually don't know each other from before we came here. I live all the way up here in this little town, or close to this town, called Nelspruit. And then Kruger National Park, which is where I do most of my work, is up here. And it looks like that. And it's a very big national park. It is fenced in, so it does have fences for the animals to not move out into, villages and areas where people live and so on. So it's really important to have those fences, both for the people who live close to national park for their protection, but also for the animals' protection, so that humans don't come in and hunt the animals illegally and so on in the park. So there is a fence around the whole park, but that doesn't mean the animals aren't wild, because it's a very, very big national park. It's 2.3 million hectares, which is about 22,000 square kilometers. And I think I was Googling, and Kuwait is about 17,000 square kilometers. So then you can imagine the size of this national park alone. It actually goes into 3 countries. Obviously, most of it is in here in South Africa, but it does go into Mozambique as well, and a little portion up in Zimbabwe too. So it goes into 3 countries. It's a massive national park. It has 147 kinds of different mammals, and then over 500 birds, 118 kinds of reptiles. So you can imagine there's a lot of animals in this place, and it's incredible. It's about 1.8 million tourists that visit this park per year, and we were just talking about it, that tourists is a massive part of conservation, because without these tourists coming to visit the national park and bringing money and providing the 10,000 jobs that this national park provides, we wouldn't be able to still protect it. So that's a very, very big part of protecting this ecosystem, is for tourists to come and visit and see these animals in the wild. One thing that I want to point out here that's good to just understand is this dark green area of the national park is government owned and state owned, so that's the national park itself, and that's open to the public. Obviously you have to pay a fee to drive in, but you can go in with your own car and you can drive around on the roads there. But then you have these little lighter green areas, and they are privately owned parts of the park. So they are usually those top luxury lodges, you know, those top luxury hotels that you guys maybe have seen photos of before, and they are in these private areas, and that's not open to the public. You can't go there with your own car unless you're staying at one of those lodges. Questions so far about where we are with Kruger and South Africa? All good? Okay. Let's explain a little bit about how it works as well, because I know this can be weird to understand, like, how come I can get this close to these animals, and you know, you're in these open safari vehicles, and why does the lion not attack us? And you know, we've got this guy sitting on the front of the car, like, why does the lion not eat him? And I completely understand that it's difficult to understand, because we see these animals as, you know, they fierce predators that they want to hunt and they need to eat, and that's what we see them as. But the great thing about doing safari on a car is that the animals have lived in these areas and grown up with vehicles, with safari cars, driving around and watching them ever since they were young little cubs. And they have never been fed from the vehicles. So they don't associate the vehicles with food. They don't really, doesn't connect for them that this is something that I could eat, that these humans in here is something that I could hunt. Because obviously since they are young, they taught from their parents how to hunt and what to hunt. So, you know, you learn to hunt zebra or buffalo or impala or other antelopes, but they never hunt the cars and us humans who are inside, and that's why they don't associate us with food. Hello, welcome. And also, depending on the area, the only reaction we sometimes get from the animals is that they are nervous with the cars, and they don't really, like, they get scared of the cars because they maybe haven't seen many cars before. If they've grown up in an area of Kruger where there isn't a lot of lodges or a lot of tourists, then sometimes when they come into a busier area, they get very scared of the cars because they don't know what this is. And then you just have to be respectful and take your time to not drive up to them too close and just give them their space and so on. But otherwise, they usually just see the car like a big moving rock and they don't think much of it. They sometimes will give you a little bit of a glance when they walk past and like watch you, but they kind of see the whole vehicle as one. And that includes the person who's sitting in the front here. He is a tracker, and he watches for tracks on the road as we're driving to try to find fresh footprints and see if, okay, these animals have walked here, this was maybe just an hour ago or something, and then, okay, these are very fresh, then you will track those animals and try to find them because you find fresh tracks. So they've grown up knowing that this is part of the shape of the vehicle, and they're very used to that. So they never really react negatively, even though he's very exposed there, and you'd think that they would take their chance. So that's why we're able to get this close to the animals. So these vehicles, these open safari vehicles, they are mostly in the private reserves, and then in the public part of the park, so if you guys remember the state-owned part of the park, we can drive around in like our own normal SUVs. So then I shoot basically from my own car and I drive around, and you drive on the roads. You're not allowed to off-road, which we are allowed to do in the other part of the park. So then we drive around in our own normal safari vehicle, our own normal SUV. Questions on that so far? All good. Cool. Here's some behind the scenes. You guys can see we do get very, very close to the animals. We've got a lion walking right behind me here. And you can see they don't really look at us. They don't really give us a second glance. We can see if we can play like this one again. See this leopard? He just looks at me a little bit, but he doesn't really care about me being there. And that's when you know, like, okay, we've been respectful to this animal. It's good. We're in a good, like, we're on a good wicket here. Like we're fine. He's not scared of us, and he's not, showing any signs of aggression. And same with this lion walking past here. He doesn't even look at me. He sneezes and then walks past. So that's how close we can get to the animals. This was just last week, and you can see she walks pretty much right underneath me. But doesn't care, because they just see us as like a big rock, basically. And then we've got, this is actually from Botswana, so that's a different way we do safaris as well. I do safaris is from a boat. It's on the Chobe River, which is a really, really big river where you can go out on boats and stuff, and then you can get really cool low angles and so on. And you can see the elephants are just walking past, they're crossing the river, and they don't really care about us in the boat. So that's how close we can sometimes get to the animals in the car. Let's get over to the fun stuff. Talk a little bit about camera gear. This is the gear that I use primarily, and then every now and then I get to borrow some fun stuff from Sony, which is great. So the two photos on the left there, you can see they're taken with the 200 to 600, which is this lens right here, and the A7R5. I'm thinking I can send this around. We're going to have a little bit of fun with them later and photograph this little dog that's on the table. But if you guys just want to feel the weight of it, because we spoke a little bit about it on the launch day at the panel, how heavy these lenses are. So we can send it around just so you get to have a bit of a feel. Yeah. I'm not sure, actually. I think that's about 1.5, the lens, and maybe the camera is 500 or something like that. You got it? This is the one I use the most. Yeah, so these, the 200 to 600 is the one I use the most. My next investment is the 300 2.8. We can send this around as well, and you will see how much lighter this lens is. Do you want to feel how light that is compared to the other one, right? But this is the one, this is my primary wildlife lens at the moment. And then you can see I've got the 24 to 70 as well that I use with an A7 IV. And that I use for more like creative wide angle stuff if I'm able to get close enough. So this, for example, is shot from the boat that I was just showing you guys. And I'm able to get that low, and there was beautiful like cloudy skies, and then I'm able to get a bit creative with that. And then this, if you guys remember on the launch day, were you guys all there for the panel? Okay, you weren't. So for those who were there, if you remember, I was talking about what happened just 3 days ago, where we had a lion walking right next to the car, similar to the video I just showed you guys. This is that male lion. So I shot this on 35mm, I think. So then you can imagine how close he was. I literally had my hand down like this, and he walked past, and like having my hand there like maybe 2 meters away from him. I obviously, I got a bit scared, and I was close to like pulling up my hand. But that's the important thing, is when you get that close to animals, it's really important to not move too quick, not make any loud noises, you know, because then you might get a reaction out of them because they get a fright and they feel threatened or something. So it's just important to stay calm and stay still and move very, very slow. So that's how I was able to get that photo. So yeah, that was very close. So I'm lucky because we've got the cars, so I don't have to like hold it all the time. What I'll do, I'll show you guys. So obviously being in the car, it's really easy because I don't have to like hike with it somewhere. Other types of wildlife photographers, they will hike with their gear. Like in America, I know they do that a lot more because they do a lot more on foot. But we do so much on vehicle because going on foot is too dangerous and you can't get close enough for it to be worth it for wildlife photography. So I'm lucky that way, but also there is a bit of a technique to how you hold the gear. So I use the left hand to be stable, and you don't want to be holding it like this. This gets super unstable. You want to make sure that you have your hands close to your body and then hold it like this. So usually it's easiest, we'll have some fun with it later and play around with this little dog here and you guys will see. It sometimes can be difficult to find your subject when you're shooting through such a long lens. And then it's easier to do it through the viewfinder itself because your hand, it's called hand-eye coordination, is a lot better. So I'll be able to a lot easier see what the lens is doing it that way. So I'll usually find the animal like that first, and then I'll put it down and use the screen to be able to lean it either on, I've got bean bags on the cars, it's like a little sandbag that I put on the side of the vehicle, and then I'm able to lean it on that, especially if I'm photographing something that's stationary, and I'm just waiting for like a perfect moment, like a bird that's gonna fly, or a lion is sleeping, and I'm just waiting for them to wake up. And then I can get my focus, my settings and everything, and just put it down like that, and then I lean on something, and I basically just hold it like that, and then it's easy. But also, yeah, I think you do build a bit of muscle handling it as much as I do, yeah? Yes. That's a really good question. So in the next slide, you guys will see my settings, and you will see that especially when shooting on these 200 to 600, because the f-stop is quite high, the ISO definitely goes up high. And unfortunately, that is just the reality of wildlife. We have to deal with really high ISO numbers, and we have to prioritize our shutter speed because we've got moving subjects, and we are often moving. And when you shoot on big lenses like this, a little bit of movement like this, just you being a little bit shaky, can create a very blurry image. So we have to shoot on fast shutter speeds, which means, and with a high f-stop on these lenses, we have to push our ISO. Luckily, I will say Sony handles ISO really well. So honestly, I can push, I've got photos that are like 64,000 ISO that I've been able to still use because of post-processing and so on. So I use a few different denoise programs that I'm trying out different kinds. That helps a lot. So that's a lifesaver for us wildlife photographers. So it's unfortunately just one of those things. But what I also do is, obviously, when I have to have a fast shutter speed, I just have to have a fast shutter speed. Like, action happens, and I rather prioritize a fast enough photo than a like low ISO photo. But what I also do is, if an animal is stationary, and we are stationary, so the car isn't moving, and I'm able to lean my camera on the beanbag like I was just talking about, what I'll do is I'll take a safety shot, and then I'll bring down the shutter speed, because I shoot on manual with auto ISO. So I bring down the shutter speed, so then my ISO comes down, and then I take another safety shot, and then I bring down the shutter speed, and then I do that until I feel like I've got a photo with a comfortable ISO, just to make sure. But usually, it's just, you just have to deal with the noise. Hope that answers the question. You guys will see my settings on the next few slides. I've got settings on all the photo. And here, talking about settings and stuff, this is how I set up my camera, and I think this can be quite interesting for people who maybe don't shoot wildlife, because you have to think a little bit differently. We can't really shoot in full manual. I always tell people that you should know how to shoot in full manual, because you should know what all the different settings do and how they work with each other. That's really important. But in wildlife, because things happen so quickly, we can't shoot in full manual because we'll miss so many shots. Are they being a bit loud over there? So we'll miss so many shots if we shoot in full manual mode. So therefore, the ones that I recommend are, especially for beginners who don't really know like shutter speed and ISO yet, I usually recommend starting with aperture priority, because it's easier, because then you just have to deal with your ISO, and then the camera deals with the shutter speed. And when you don't really know what shutter speed is yet, it's just easier to let the camera do that. So that's my recommendation for anyone who is not just there yet. But if you know how to shoot on manual, what I recommend doing is shooting on manual with auto ISO, because then we can put our aperture to pretty much the lowest possible in like 90% of our situations, because of the low light that we're shooting in and the fast shutter speeds that we have to deal with, unless you're shooting at something like a 2.8, because then the depth of field becomes so shallow, so then you probably want to bring that up. But in general, we don't change our aperture too often, so you just set your aperture to like quite a low standard default, and then you change your shutter speed depending on the light, depending on what the animal is doing, depending on what type of photo you want to get, and then the camera does the ISO for you, and you just keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't skyrocket unnecessarily. But that's kind of how I do it, and how I recommend doing it if you know how to shoot on manual. So that's the first one. The other thing is definitely autofocus is a massive thing for wildlife photography. You know, and we're gonna have some fun with it with that little dog. You guys will get to see how these cameras can do the autofocus and how nicely they can pick up the eye on the animal. It's insane. So that's a massive game changer, to be able to set up your autofocus, use the AI eye tracking on the Sony cameras. It just helps out so much, because then we can focus a lot more on composition than having to worry about, is my photo in focus and is it sharp and all of that. So that's a big one. Then continuous shooting is also something that's very specific for wildlife photography, is making sure that we have to shoot on continuous shooting, so having a big amount of frames per second. And obviously, depending on the camera that you shoot with, different cameras have different frames per second. So like something like the A9 Mark III shoots at 120 frames per second, which is wild. And I don't think even in wildlife photography, we don't really need that much most of the time. But if you're photographing something like a bird that's flying or something like that, you want a lot of frames to choose from. So you want to be able to just click away as the action happens, because it happens like this. And just click away, and then afterwards be able to pick the perfect frame, the perfect moment, when the wings are in a specific position, or the animal is walking a specific way, or something like that. So continuous shooting is a big one for wildlife photography as well. And then in general, and I think this is probably for most types of photography, but especially for wildlife, is customizing your buttons to make sure that your buttons are set up in a way that works specifically for you, where you know exactly where to press to change something on your camera. So for me, I've got all different type of customizations. So I have my camera here, so when we're gonna shoot later, you guys will try it, and then I'm sure you might get confused, because my customization for my camera will be very different to how you need to customize your camera for you, because my needs will be different from yours. So always, it's just important to customize it to your needs, and sometimes it becomes a completely new camera, but that's the beautiful thing with customizing it, because I know when I pick up my camera and I'm shooting through, if I'm looking through the viewfinder, I want to know exactly where I change my shutter speed and when I change my f-stop. And I don't want to have to look at my screen and be like, where am I going? Because then the moment's gone. You need to be able to change things like this in wildlife photography, otherwise you miss the shot. So any questions on settings so far? All good? Cool. Then let's move over to a little bit of stories behind the shots, and I've got some settings for you guys here. So a few photo examples and a few photos that I think have kind of cool stories behind them. First of all, in the very far left here, we've got something called I'll get out of the way if you guys want to take photos. So we've got a mongoose. It's a little almost like a rat. It's kind of like this big. They're quite cute. They're not as ugly as rats are. But this is actually taken in my back garden. So I was going to show you when you guys looked at the map, but I don't actually live inside the national park. I live outside of the national park. No? Yes, that would be perfect. Thank you. That would be great. Oh, fantastic. Much better. Then you guys maybe want to take your photos again. So yeah, I don't actually live inside the national park. So where I live, we don't have any dangerous animals. I live about 20 minutes from the national park itself, and then I go into the national park to photograph animals. But where I live, we do have a few small animals, like the mongoose, for example. We don't have anything dangerous except for snakes, but they are everywhere and we can't really do anything about that, unfortunately. But these guys actually eat snakes, so it's great. they keep them away. And they come in like a little pack, I guess, or clan, I think you call them actually, of like 20 of them, and they make the funniest noise. And they come around to my garden almost every afternoon. And it's a great opportunity to have fun and like practice wildlife photography. And this is what I want to give to you guys as well, if you're interested, and I'll get more into this later in the presentation, but if you're interested in wildlife photography, start with everything that is close by. You know, I was walking down by the water today, and there's so many cats, and I know they're like, oh, feral cats, and it's not the same thing as a leopard. No, but it is basically the same thing as a leopard. They're like small little mini leopards. And you can start practicing with those type of things. And the most things that I have learned has been in my backyard, playing around with light and photographing the stuff that I have close by. So anything from birds to cats to wherever. So these little mongoose I have a lot of fun with because they're really cute and they make for great photos. But you can look at the settings here. Obviously, like you see the ISO does go up quite high. In my opinion, this is not too high yet. Fine, this is not a problem. But I know in a lot of other types of photography, this is like, whoa. But it is because we've got a high f-stop. You can see I've brought down my shutter speed to 1/500, which is kind of pushing it a little bit because I was shooting on a 600mm lens. Usually, you actually want to double your shutter speed for what lens you're photographing with, for the focal length of your lens. But here I was bringing it down because I was being very stable, and just that's also where continuous shooting comes in, because I shoot away, pressing the shutter, making sure I get several photos, because then I know one of them should be sharp with the animal standing still. And also what's nice here, what I wanted to give as an example, is obviously with the high f-stops, we don't often get that nice separation in the background. But here I was lying on the ground and then getting that down low like that and shooting kind of through the grass and everything. It looks like I'm shooting at 2.8. So it actually works out quite nicely. When you know the techniques of how to shoot, you can still get that nice separation from the background. Obviously, a 2.8 does help, but you know, we have to do what we have to do. And then we've got a leopard here, and this is in the self-drive part of Kruger National Park. Many people think that you have to go to the most expensive lodges and the most luxury places to be able to photograph wildlife. And that's not true. Like, it helps. Obviously, the luxury places are there for a reason, and they have the sightings, and they can, you know, charge the prices that they charge for a reason. But in the national park itself, in South Africa, in Kruger, we have incredible sightings by simply just driving around myself in my car. And this is one of those days where I actually dropped off my fiance for cricket, and then I went driving around the park by myself, which is my favorite way to spend the day. While he's playing cricket and he can have fun doing that, then I go and drive around looking for leopards. And I came across this female leopard, and she was walking down the road, which was amazing, and the light was just stunning, you know, golden hour. So I tried to, she was also very comfortable with me. I was talking earlier about making sure you read the animal's behavior when you're approaching them. And she was super confident, comfortable with me, wasn't bothered at all. So I managed to get ahead of her, because that's also really important. You want to try to get in front of the animal, get them walking towards you. And she was just walking down the road. I managed to drive around her and then turn the car around. And then I'm like leaning out the window, trying to photograph her, and then I reverse, and then because she gets closer, and then I'm taking some photos, and then I'm reversing, and then I take photos. It's quite difficult, I must say. But it worked out amazingly, especially when she walked through this like the light shining through the branches and stuff creates these like shadows. And I love playing around with this type of light. When you get that dark background and her walking through the light, creates that studio-like type of photo, and I love doing that. So it worked out amazingly. And that's also, you can see here, I've got a 640 shutter speed, but the ISO is not too bad because of the light. The distance here, good question. I think so at some point she was walking right past the vehicle. But I think this one, she's actually a little bit further away because I was trying to be ahead of her. And when shooting on the 600, I prefer being further away because then I can zoom in completely and compress the background. So here she was maybe, let's see, by that plant maybe? Something like that? Yeah. Yeah, so that was amazing. And then we've got, this is actually from the very same day. It was a really good day for me in the park. And this is a bird that's called a southern ground hornbill. It's actually my favorite bird. People think they're ugly. I think they're beautiful. They're quite big. They're like this size or something. They look like a big turkey. And the cool thing here was that I spotted the birds walking like next to the road. And there was quite a lot of other cars around. That's what happens in the national park because you've got a lot of cars driving around. And they all like watching the hornbills and everything, but then they disappeared and like walked kind of into the river. And I was like, but you know what? They were heading in this direction, and I know that if I continue on this road, there's a little loop that goes around. Maybe they will come out on that loop. So I did. I drove ahead, parked on that loop, looking through the photos that I'd just taken and just checking if I got anything good. And there we go, they popped out. So it worked out amazingly, and that's also like it has to do with knowing the animal behavior and knowing the areas that you're in, that like, okay, right now they were in the bushes, it wasn't great, but if I get ahead and I drive over on this road, then I can maybe get the photo that I'm looking for. And they came out with, this is a skink that they have in the beak, came out carrying that very proudly and managed to get these photos of them walking in the shade. And here you can also see, I was shooting on a higher shutter speed here because I was also driving and like driving around and stuff and being a little bit shaky, and they were walking. So I put my shutter speed up a little bit higher. And then obviously the ISO does go up high because as soon as you shoot something in the shade, the ISO goes up high. You think, because this was at like 12 o'clock, so you think there's a lot of light, you think it should be fine, but as soon as you're photographing in the shade, it does bring up the ISO as well. So yeah, any questions on these photos? Cool. Let's move on to the next one. So this was with this lens right here, which is a beautiful lens. The 300 2.8 that just came out now, like 6 months ago, a year ago, something. And this was in Zimbabwe earlier this year, and I was lucky enough to borrow this lens from Sony for a bit, which was awesome. And this is all these photos are taken in the same sighting. They like within half an hour maybe, but you can see that they're all quite different. These two are quite similar because they're right after each other. But this one is just a little bit later, and the light has just set, the sun has just set, so the light has dropped. We're shooting a little bit more blue hour light, as we call it. So we obviously got the golden hour there, and then moving into more blue hour, and it just turns into a completely different photo. What happened here was that this male, he's called Blondie, because he's quite light in color. And what happened here was that he was with a female, and they had been lying in the shade close to this open clearing the whole day. And then there was a water hole on this open clearing, and we saw them come out from the shady spots. And we saw that they were walking in the direction of the water, and we were like, you know what, it's been hot today, they're gonna come to the water, so let's try to get ahead of them and park our vehicle, like we see them there, this is the direction, and here's the water, let's park in between them and the water and get them walking past the car. And that's when you get the best photos, is when you put yourself in a position before the animal gets there and think about where are they going next, what are we doing, and then position yourself there so that they not scared of you chasing them or, you know, driving right up to them all of a sudden, because then they will be a little bit, oh, what's this car doing here? Just if you've parked there, even if it's just a few minutes before they get to that spot, you're able to get them walking right past the vehicle, which makes for amazing photos because they're very comfortable with the cars. So these are the photos earlier in the slide when we had the lion sneezing next to the car. This is the one. These are the photos. In the car, yes. I don't go out of the car, no. It's very risky, and not really for, if I were to go out the car, the lion would probably just run away. They wouldn't really attack me. No, so I think maybe you arrived a little bit later, but I was explaining earlier that they don't associate the vehicle as food. They don't really see that connection. So that's why, like, they don't attack the vehicle. They're very comfortable with it, and they're just like, okay, cool, you guys are here, as long as we obviously respect their space and so on. But if I were to jump off the vehicle right next to them, they would probably run away because all of a sudden there's this person on two legs, like, what's it doing here? It's weird. And then I ruin the sighting for everyone, and it doesn't work out great. Or they would maybe act aggressively. They wouldn't they probably wouldn't try to kill me, but they would maybe like growl at me or charge at me and be like, hey, we don't like you being here, or something like that. Sorry? No, we don't really have any guards with us. We do have like the guides themselves, so they will have rifles or guns with them, but not always when we're driving. That's usually for if we were to do a walking safari. Then you have to carry a gun for safety, but in the car you don't have to. Depends on the areas. Areas have different regulations, and different countries have different regulations, but we don't have to have a gun with us. But if we were to walk, then we have to have a gun. And then they're obviously very qualified in that, and so on, so yeah. So that was this sighting, and very same sighting is also here. He was walking over the open plain, and this is probably like one of my dream shots that I was able to capture, because many people think he's roaring, and he's not roaring. It doesn't look like this when they roar. He's just yawning, but it still looks very cool. When they roar, it doesn't look like it does on the movies. It's a very deep sound. I wonder if we have time later, I'll show you guys a video of what it looks like when they're actually roaring. But you can see here, like, obviously I'm shooting with the teleconverter on the 300, which handles amazingly. Like, I barely see any loss of quality. The teleconverter is amazing that way. But then obviously that brings up the f-stop to f4. But on this 2.8, I would be shooting around f4 anyway, because otherwise the depth of field is so shallow that you're losing a lot of detail. So I think I was doing that on these as well. You can see I'm shooting on f4. But you can see here on these two first photos, I've got a shutter speed of 2,500, which is quite high. But I can do that because the light is so great. And then ISO of 640 is not a problem at all. And same thing here, ISO 500 is fine. But here, I'm dropping it a little bit because it was starting to get a little bit darker. And I was shooting, and then you can see the ISO is also on 4,000 there. And same thing on this photo, it's also on 4,000 because the light is dropping a little bit here. So that's Blondie. Here we've got a bird, a big eagle called a Marshall eagle. Incredible bird. It's Africa's largest eagle. And this was also in the self-drive part of Kruger National Park. And I came across this eagle sitting on this dead branch, and the sun setting, like lighting up the clouds. It was one of those dreamy days. And doing wildlife photography, this is one of those moments that you just wait for, because the time that the clouds, even if you guys do landscape or something like that, the time that the clouds and the sky and the sunset is the most beautiful is the time that you're in the grocery store or something. And it's not when you're out trying to photograph wildlife. And with wildlife, it's also like, it's not just that the sky needs to be beautiful, it's also that you need to have, like, even if I have a sky that's beautiful and I am out in the wild, I need an animal to photograph it, and the animal needs to be in a position where I can get the sky and the animal. Very often in Kruger, it's quite a thick area. It's not really like Serengeti that many people imagine, that open areas. It's not really like that. It's very thick bush. So even if you have an animal, the sky, there will be like trees and stuff, and then the sky is only up there, so you can't really get the animal and the sky. So here it worked out so nicely, finding this martial eagle sitting with this beautiful sky behind him on the dead branch, you know, clean, no bushes, nothing. I positioned myself, because this is also the thing, like, it's positioning yourself, making sure you're driving in a way where you now get the sky and the bird behind, because at first I was shooting with sky that was just normal blue sky, you know, and not these beautiful clouds. So I had to position myself with the sky behind it like this. And then again, reading the animal's behavior, I saw that he was about to take off, because them doing this and like ruffling their feathers and then they poo and they like, those type of things are signs for birds about to take off. So I was reading that behavior and seeing he was about to take off. And you can see in the beginning here, I was shooting on quite a low shutter speed because I was trying to handle the noise a little bit. So I was doing that technique I was talking about earlier, just bringing it down, bringing it down. So I was taking that photo on quite a low shutter speed with a low ISO. But then I saw him showing these signs, and I brought up my shutter speed to 1,600, because birds in flight, you need a much higher shutter speed. And then he took off, and it worked out. So yeah, that's one of my personal favorites from earlier this year, because it just, the sky, you know, when everything just comes together and works out perfectly. But it's also about, you know, when everything comes together and everything works out perfectly, it's about knowing what to do in those moments and having that experience and being prepared and knowing what settings to use to be able to capture those perfect moments. Questions about the martial eagle? All good. Cool. Then I also enjoy a lot to get creative and play around with light and like dark backgrounds. I love a low-key photo. Can you guys see what this is? It's actually an elephant. You can see here's the mouth, and then it's water dropping. It's an elephant drinking. So that's the whole point of that photo, is to make you think a little bit and wonder what is it. And that's, I think, sometimes I get guests and students who they only want to get those like clean portrait shots, and they're like, oh, but is this a good photo? You can't see the animal, like you can't see the animal's face. And I'm like, it's an amazing photo because you're still telling a story, and you can still see that it is an animal, and you can see that it's deliberate, that you've been, you know, zooming in on these details and playing with the light like this, but you're telling a story through, and you don't have to show all the details in the animal's face. You can still play around with the light like this. So I enjoy doing that a lot. So this is a baboon this is in Serengeti. And you know, that beautiful morning light, and baboons do really well with these type of rim light photos because they've got such long hair that the light can shine through, so they do really well for that stuff. So I obviously underexposed this photo. For these type of photos, you want to make sure you underexpose quite a lot. I think like a -2 probably. This also, I think I went like -3 because it was really, really dark around. And then it's a leopard, and we actually had we had 2 vehicles watching the leopard, and we asked the other vehicle to shine their spotlight, their torch, onto the leopard from behind so that we could get this photo. So that was also, you know, that was a little bit more studio-like, I guess, because it's not the sun. But then you're able to get that rim light, as they call it. And then this was actually from the boat in Botswana, in Chobe. I showed you guys earlier a photo of what it looks like being on the boat. And then having the sun shine through, and especially the last bit of light during the day, just underexposing a lot and just focusing on these details works out really, really nicely. So yeah, that one was also with the 300 2.8, and the others are with the 200 600. Questions on these? This one, yes, exactly. Yeah, so this is after sunset. So we're often out during sunset, and then like maybe an hour after sunset, because the nocturnal wildlife, they come out. So there's a lot of animals that you can't really see during the day because they're not as active. So we're often out, and leopards are one of those animals that get more active at night. So then we watched her. We had been watching her eating a carcass actually in a tree. She had an impala kill. And then she came down, so we watched her come down from the tree, and then she went to go drink from this little puddle. And then we positioned ourselves when we knew she was going to turn around and come back to the tree. And that's when we asked the other vehicle to shine on her so we could get this photo. Yeah. Cool. Then on the other side, we've got the high key photos. So this is more something that works well in like harsh daylight. You know, we all hate the 12 o'clock daylight light. Fatima was talking about it yesterday. It's the worst time of the day to photograph. And especially with wildlife, like you get a lot of like harsh highlights on elephants and stuff. So I struggle with that light. But it's a good time to play around with high key photos. So obviously we had the low key photos before it's my personal favorites, but I do enjoy doing this as well. And that's obviously what I do here is going the other way where I go plus, and we've got a bright background. So works best with like birds that are sitting on a dead branch or something, and on an overcast day when the sky is already a little bit grayish, because when the sky is blue, it still gets this weird tint to it, so it doesn't really work out as well. So you need the gray background, the gray sky, and then going plus to get the details out of the bird, and then you just overexpose the background and you get these high key photos. A lot of people think that this is done in Photoshop. No Photoshop here whatsoever. It's just, you can literally do this in camera from the start. Just a bright background, go plus with your exposure compensation, and get the details out of the bird, and then you overexpose the background. And in Lightroom, all I do is I may just make sure that I'm losing all details in the whites in the background. So if you guys know Lightroom at all, you know you can press that little triangle next to the histogram. I might be losing people here, I feel like, but you press a little triangle next to the histogram in the very top corner in Lightroom. You can do that for the highlights, and you can do that for the whites and for the blacks. And if you press that, then Lightroom will show red anywhere where you're losing detail, where the whites and the highlights are clipping. And when you do that, obviously in general you don't want it to clip. But when we're photographing something like this, I want the background to be completely white. And then I make sure that I press that little triangle and make sure that everything is completely red. It's in the very top corner in Lightroom, next to the histogram. Do you know the histogram? Yeah, there's like a little triangle on the very top. You will press that, and then you will see it will show you red. And then on the other side, it will be another triangle for the blacks, and that will show blue if you're losing detail. Yeah, so it doesn't create this. It will just help you see that you're losing losing detail in the whites. So you just make sure that it all shows up as red, because sometimes what our eyes see, especially on a screen, it looks like it's completely white, but it isn't. We actually have like a little grayish spot here or something. And then when you print that photo, that will show up as gray, and it looks super weird. So that's why I just make sure that it all is completely white. I would say these photos are better to do during the day. It's the kind of thing that you can play around with when you have harsh light, especially if you have something like this kudu, for example. So this is an antelope called kudu, and he was standing in the shade, and then I had very bright background behind him because it was the middle of the day. So then again, having that contrast between the subject being in a dark area, or the subject itself being very dark, and the background being very bright. That's when you can make these type of photos, because then you just expose for the subject and make sure the subject is correctly exposed, and then the background gets blown out. And maybe you just need to do a little bit of correcting in Lightroom, enhancing it a little bit more. And black and white also works nicely for these. So same thing with this elephant. He was also walking through the shade, and then had very bright background behind him. So then I was able to just do it extra much in Lightroom, enhance it a bit, and then, yeah. Yes, on a sunny day, yes. So this photo was on a cloudy day, but that was on a sunny day, that was on a sunny day. So both works, but you need quite a lot of light. But the most important thing is that it's a dark subject and a bright background. Yes. No, actually not. I know some people that try it with wildlife. I think the thing is, it just becomes too complicated for us to try to shoot, because it's just one more thing that you have to think about. You could try it. I know some people that have used it, but I think for wildlife it just becomes one more thing to think about, and we always try to have we have less things to think about because everything happens so quickly. Yeah. So yeah. Any other questions on these? Cool. Okay, so moving on a little bit about like how to get started. I don't know how many of you that already own cameras. If you already own a camera, fantastic. Go with that. You know, when you're getting started, you don't need to invest in the like best, biggest camera because you're just getting started. So whatever camera you have, go with that. But otherwise, these are some suggestions. So the first two ones, the A6700 is a really, really good APS-C camera for wildlife. It's basically the A7R5 in an APS-C sensor. Is it sounding weird there? Am I better now? You guys can hear me? Okay. It's basically the A7R5 but with a crop sensor. It got insane autofocus as well. Really, really good camera. So 100% recommend that one. The A7 IV is a good full-frame camera that is not as expensive as the other three Pro cameras there. Also a really good place to start. I use that as my second camera that I have my 24-70 on, and every now and then I'll use it for wildlife with the 200-600 as well. And then for Pro cameras, we obviously got the A7R5 here. Yes, these two. A7R5, incredible. That's the one I use personally. Love it so much. Fatima was talking about it yesterday as well. She was also shooting with it. It's got a really high megapixel sensor, so you can really, with wildlife, that helps because you can crop even more, which helps a lot. But the only negative thing with the A7R5 for wildlife specifically is that it doesn't have a very high frames per second. So it goes maximum up to like 10. And then obviously you've got like the A9 Mark III or the A1. The A1 is obviously, you know, flagship. It's like the best camera. So that one's got everything in one. But the A9 Mark III that we have here is a 25 megapixel sensor, but it shoots on like 120 frames per second, which is insane. So yeah, those are some camera suggestions. Happy to chat more cameras if you guys are looking at anything and you want to get some advice. More than happy to chat about that. But for wildlife, especially starting out, or in general, I would say the absolute most important thing is the lens. So to start out, a 70-300 is a really good place to start, especially if you're shooting on a crop sensor camera, because with the crop, you basically get, I think we calculated the other day with a guest of mine, and you get like 500 millimeters on the 70-300. So it's a really good place to start. It's, you know, because as soon as you get over to these, especially these, you're talking about big money and big investments. And they cost that much for a reason because they're incredible lenses, but you maybe don't want to start there when you're just starting out. So those are really good options. The 100-400 that we have here, also a great option, but now we're stepping up a little bit, and then the 200-600 that I'm using as well is also a fantastic lens for wildlife. So those are some good things to start with. Then we've got post-processing. Obviously, we don't post-process to fix a photo. It's very important to still get it right in camera, but post-processing can definitely help to like bring out your style and, you know, take the photo from nice to wow. You know, to really bring it out, especially when we're shooting in RAW, we can do so much with a photo to really enhance it. And there's a lot of things that we can only do so much in camera. And there's certain things that we have to do in post-processing to really bring it out to what our eyes saw when we captured it. So post-processing is something that I also recommend just working on and playing around with a lot with wildlife photography as well when you're getting started. And then practice in general. You know, wildlife is everywhere. I mentioned it earlier. You can photograph birds. You can photograph the cats on the street. Like, I literally have a guest who specializes in feral cats, and that's all she photographs. And it's incredible. Her work is amazing. If you know what you're doing and you taking in the advice that I've been talking about now, you can go out there at sunset and get some incredible photos of these cats. And birds are everywhere. And then, you know, once you've started with the small things around you that you have in your local areas, once you've done that, and practice a lot with those things, that's when you can maybe invest in moving over to like either local wildlife. I know there's the desert here close by, here in Kuwait, hey, that also has some wildlife. I've seen some photos from there, know people who've gone there. Yes. Okay. Amazing. Okay, but still, amazing place to go. Like, go there, start working there, and then, you know, if you want to then go to the next step and go to the exotic places and go to Africa or India or America, whatever it might be, to go photograph the bigger wildlife, then you know what you're doing because you've started locally and you've practiced and you've learned your gear and you know exactly what you're doing with your cameras and with your lenses. And that's when it's time to be able to go to the next place. That's amazing. Yeah. See, it's a fantastic place to go photograph them. That's awesome. I've seen photos of the cats, I think. I know a guy who photographs there. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah, so like those cats, you know, in the desert, amazing to photograph, and that's really rare to be able to see them, and you need to know what you're doing. See, so you guys have lots of wildlife here as well. You know, that's a great place to start. Yeah. Yeah, so 100%, you know, go out there and learn everything that you can there and photograph this because there's so much to see if you focus on like the small things as well and you know, just be appreciative of everything. You also wanted to ask? Yes. So I'm the wrong person to ask because I don't do marine wildlife, unfortunately. It's a completely different field. Marine wildlife is, you know, you need your, like, one, you need to be able to dive and do that, and I can't dive. I don't know how to. So you need to have that qualification. And then secondly, you need to have these what do you call them? The cages. Yeah, the underwater cages and stuff, and they are also very expensive. And then as far as I've understood, talking to some wildlife photographers that do marine wildlife, is you don't use the telephoto lenses. You use more things like this. And you're dealing with a completely different dynamic because you're shooting through water. So you have to get very close because if you're shooting too far away, you have too much water in between and you can't actually see the animal. So it's a completely different world. So I actually don't do any marine wildlife, so unfortunately I'm the wrong person to ask. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions on this? All good. Like I said, you know, focus on the small things. Some of my best photos that I personally love the most have not been the big cats or the amazing elephants or anything like that. It's been the small things because you can get really creative there. You can, you know, with birds and stuff, you can really play around with like shutter speeds and light and position yourself and all of those type of things. And that's when you can really have a lot of fun. So don't forget about the small things. I think a lot of people focus on the big and amazing, crazy, scary ones, and then you're missing 90% of the animals that are here to see. So the small things are a lot of fun to photograph as well, and that's when we can get down low. I can't get down low on the ground with a leopard, so I'm able to do that here. I'm lying on the ground just a couple of meters away from it, so I can do that with a mongoose. I can't do that with a leopard. Just letting you guys take your photos. Then you also need to learn to work with the right time of the day. We spoke a little bit about this with, you know, the harsh light conditions and so on, and this is really important in wildlife, not only for the light, but also for the activity of the animals. So animals are the most active during, animals are the most active in the early mornings and the late afternoons. At sunrise, sunset, that's when they are the most active, and that's also the best light of the day, so it's a win-win situation, you know. So that's when we can play around with, you know, the sunset golden light and have these beautiful golden shades to our photo. So that's something that's really good to learn, is to play around with different times of the day. Like I was talking about these feral cats on down at the beach there. I think going out there and photographing them at sunset, you can probably get some of the most insane photos, because it's such a beautiful scenery, and like they're really comfortable with people, so you can probably get quite close. You don't want to get too close, obviously, but and you can play around with lights and stuff there. I think like that's a really cool place. If I had my lens and stuff with me, and if I had more time here, I probably would go out and photograph those cats, I promise you. Because I think you can get some amazing stuff. So right time of the day is really, really important as well. And then we have composition is obviously the key to kind of any photography. And I play around with the different types of composition. I'm a sucker for rule of thirds. I definitely do a lot of rule of thirds stuff. So like the lion here, you know, you guys, I'm guessing most of you know what the rule of thirds are. But I also love to play around with like negative space, especially when you have like a lot of space to work with. So this is in Botswana. I was able to get this from the boat, because you're able to get down low and like get the sunset, you know, and the elephants walking over these open plains. It's stunning. So instead of just getting a photo of like the elephant like that, which is quite boring, you know, you show the whole open space and the negative space and letting the animal walk into the frame, and you get all these beautiful colors in the sky. For this one, it was the 200-600. I think all of these, no, sorry, these were the 200-600, and this was the 300. This is the same lion as the one I was showing earlier. Yeah. But the others were the 200-600. Yes, there's a sunset, just after sunset. So like blue hour. So the sky was stunning. And again, you know, we talk about like you don't have to see the details in the animal to understand it's an elephant. Like a silhouette shot like that, you know, you can really play around with that, and then the colors in the sky. And then using, you know, natural framing. So this is a little hyena cub. They're so cute. And the mom came back to the den, and they were all so excited, and they were like, you know, running around, screaming and being so cute. And then she was standing in this perfect arch, you know, with the hyena in the middle. Being able to use that natural framing can really enhance a photo as well. And then for more like portraits and shots where we've got like the animals straight ahead and we've got a lot of symmetry going on, that's when I'll do something like a centered composition, where you just got the, you know, animals smack bang in the middle looking straight at you, and then that works very nicely. Yeah. And then we were chatting about post-processing, and I just wanted to, oh my word, this feels, how satisfying is it that it goes through the exact, my OCD loves that. So what a bit different post-processing can make. You know, these are the photos straight out of camera, these ones on the top. You can see they're a little bit flat, like there's not a lot of contrast. You guys know that's how raw photos work. And we obviously need to bring out the vision that we saw and what we felt when we photographed them, and add the, like, not add, but bring out the golden light that we have, that we had in the scene. So it makes a massive difference to be able to do a lot of post-processing and really enhance the photo. And we're not changing anything, we're not taking away anything. I don't like taking away like scars, or if they have a fly somewhere, I don't take that away, I keep it there, because it's not perfect. They're wild animals, and it's in the wild, you know, but I like to just enhance it and bring out the vision that I saw. Yes, I'm pretty sure I shot them with standard, yes. Yeah, so these are the two raw photos, and then into Lightroom. But I don't think that the picture profiles affect raw photos. But I do know, I think I usually use standard when I'm editing them to get them out, yeah. Cool. Let's see. So, talking a little bit, this is a question I get a lot. So I think, you know, there's something I wanted to mention as well, and talk a little bit about, is like, how do I actually make money as a wildlife photographer? You know, it's quite obvious when you talk about wedding photographers or portrait photographers or corporates, you know, it's quite obvious where they get their money from. They get clients, they pay them, they book them for a shoot, and then they deliver the photos and they get money. But the animals are not going to pay me for photographing them. So how do I make money as a wildlife photographer? And this is very different for everyone. I think a lot of people have this idea that wildlife photographers, they shoot for Nat Geo and they go out there, take photos, deliver the photos to Nat Geo, and then that's how they get paid. But that's not the case, especially not anymore, and with the new world we live in with social media and the way the world works at the moment, there's a lot of other ways to make money. And I also know, I listened to an interview of a Nat Geo photographer, and he said he doesn't know a single photographer that actually makes money only taking photos. A lot of even the Nat Geo photographers who we kind of see as the top photographers, you know, they also host workshops and teach and sell prints or whatever it might be. They have other streams of income as well. So for me specifically, my main stream of income is photographic guiding, which means I'm teaching people out in the wild as we out on safari, do photographic safaris. I'm teaching them how to take photos of wildlife. So that's my main stream of income. So I host many different safaris throughout the year. I host group safaris where people book like a workshop, where people book specific dates, but then I also do private safaris. So people will come to me and say, I want to go and photograph wildlife, and these are the animals I want to photograph, this is what I want to learn, this is how long I want to go for, this is my budget, and then we plan a safari around that, and I come with them and teach them everything that I can during that time. So that's my main stream of income. And then I also sell digital products. So things like I've got an ebook, I've got an editing course, an online editing course on my website. Those type of things is what I do as well, sell that on my website. And that obviously sells a lot through social media. Then you can work with brands like, you know, I'm working with Sony, and yes, it's very loud out there. You know, working with Sony like I do here and do other types of collaborations and so on is also something that I'm doing, and that's also another source of income. But for me, it's a lot of teaching. It all comes down to teaching, and that's because I enjoy teaching a lot. I also have physical products, like I have a calendar that I bring out every year, and I've got prints that I sell as well, and so on. So those are also physical products that I sell, but they don't do as well, but it's also because I don't put a lot of effort into it. I know photographers that sell their prints for like 35,000 euros each. And it's because they have put a lot of effort into that and creating a story behind their photos, and they have the marketing and the contacts and all of that, you know. So it depends on what you spend your time like investing in and what you want to, you know, focus on and what you feel works for you as a photographer. I wouldn't really be that person to like sell my prints the way that I know this other photographer does. I don't know if I would feel comfortable selling a photo for 35,000 euros. But you know, it just completely depends on who you are as a person. Then there's obviously like things like YouTube and other social media. YouTube pays for, like, if you grow enough on YouTube, there's wildlife photographers that only post on YouTube and then get paid for that. There's licensing. You can license your photos, and that's really important to know as photographers, the value our photos have and how much you can actually sell them from a licensing point of view. It's really important to read up on that. And then you can have like articles, like you write an article for a company, for a magazine or something, and then they pay you for your photos and for your article. So those are just some few ideas of like how you can actually make money as a wildlife photographer. Then, you know, as I said, it's really important to figure out what works for you. Not everyone's path is not the same. It's very, very different for everyone. Teaching, as I said, works amazingly for me because I enjoy teaching. That's where my passion lies as well. I love teaching. So for me, that's been natural to move into that direction and do photographic guiding and teach through my digital products. That's been my natural progression. But not everyone is going to be outgoing like I am, and not everyone enjoys talking to people the way I do and teaching the way I do. So then it's important to, you know, try to find your way and how you can best make money for your personality and for your, you know, wherever you are based and all of those kind of things. So that's just important to think about what works for you. You can combine it with other genres. Like I know wildlife photographers that photograph like interior for lodges and those type of things, and or even, you know, they do photography for one type of genre and do maybe wedding photography, but then wildlife is more their hobby, and they're able to combine it sometimes and so on. So, you know, it doesn't always have to be the full-time job either. Especially in the beginning, it doesn't have to be the only thing that you do. It takes a while to build up to that as well. And then social media is a good one to mention as well. I think the main important thing that I want to talk about social media, because I always get the question about how do you grow your following and how do you grow on social media, is that yes, growing your following on social media can help, definitely, and it can open up certain doors, but that shouldn't be the main focus. I think connection with your audience is the absolute main focus when it comes to social media, and giving value to your audience, if that is from teaching and sharing tips and tricks, or if that is from inspiring them, or, you know, whatever it might be. It's really important to just connect with your audience, because at the end of the day, those are the people who have chosen to support you through following you on social media, and they are the most important people that you have around you. So looking at them as just a number on a screen kind of devalues that a little bit. They are people behind those following numbers, you know, and it's really important to focus on the connection that you have with them and connect with the people that follow you on social media, because then they will support you in whatever you choose to do and how you try to build your business. They will be the ones who are making that possible. So it's really important to think about that as well. Any questions on these so far? Good. Well, thank you for listening. Before we finish up, I'm done with the slide. And if you guys want to check out my Instagram, here it is, and my website is there as well if you guys want to have a look there. But I was thinking, before we finish up, because we've got a little bit more time, you guys are obviously welcome to ask me questions and stuff, but we can have some fun with this little dog here. So we can just grab a few of these cameras. Only 3 of them have SD cards in them, but you can still use the camera, just to kind of show you guys what it's like to actually take photos with them. Let's see. There we go. There we go. Okay, so we can come around over here. Yeah, maybe. Let's do that. It won't break, eh? Oh, yeah, thanks. There we go. Okay, so yeah, just to kind of show you guys, just turn it off. There you go. And then you can just you can see there, pointing it to, there you go. You can see how it picks up the eyes perfectly, hey? It's quite nice to see. Yeah, exactly. And if you want to, so there you can see it's a little bit blurry, so we can try again. Zoom into 200, and then you need to press this button. There you go. And just remember what I said, like you hold it stable like this. There you go. Yes, exactly. So this is the zoom. And then you just hold it, and you make sure you hold it stable with your hands close to your body. Yes. And then you press that button to focus, and then you take a photo. And then you can zoom in. You see how sharp that is. Oops. There you go. Cool, hey?
It's not showing anything.
Oh, that's weird. That's super weird. Zoomed in. I wonder if this lens is broken. Let's see. Let me turn this off.